In brief, I've got a short time to tell you about what I think you need to know about what happened at Grenfell Tower. A brief history of fire safety to put some context around why cross is so important to the fire sector. An introduction to how we've reacted in England to the Grenfell Tower fire and where cross fits in. I believe you can see my bio somewhere amongst all this technology, but my history is in the fire service. I joined in the 1970s, and I'm driven to continue to help to reduce the number of deaths, fires and injuries because of those experiences and knowledge that prevention is far better than cure. But on that terrible night back in June 2017, just after midnight, fire broke out on the 4th floor of Grenfell Tower. So on the lowest occupied residential floor, giving the fire the greatest opportunity to travel in the direction which it most favours to engulf the 20 floors above it. It was just after midnight, which is the time when people are generally in their deepest sleep if they've already gone to bed. And on the first warm night of the year, when potentially more windows were open than normal, that's not come out as a major factor in any research that I've seen, but was believed at the time to possibly contribute to changing the wind patterns around the building, within the building. We've heard from Paul that there was an investigation, there's been an inquiry, and Dame Judith Hackett was brought in almost immediately after the fire to look at what went wrong, and she was tasked with reviewing building regulations and fire safety. Amongst her 52 recommendations, she put forward the concept that cross should be strengthened and expanded, but the word she used was that there was a cultural issue across the sector which can be described as a race to the bottom, and a lot of ethical emphasis being placed on how people's behaviours needed to change. And that provides the lever into where cross comes into the picture. In the time that Dame Judith was looking at how Grenfell occurred, we gradually discovered that we'd not just got Grenfell Tower covered in the ACM polyethylene cord cladding with combustible insulation underneath. We've got 500 buildings or thereabouts, over 18 metres tall, used as flats with the same problem. So this wasn't a one-off, this was a major failing of the sector. How could such a thing happen? We'd had fire safety legislation in England since 1189, and it had been developed further, particularly for London, after the Great Fire of 1666. We'd recognised that the potential for fire spread between buildings, the fire spread across buildings, needed to be controlled. So how could we have such a major failure in England in our time? The protection of the public from fire had been left for decades, in fact, all across the last century, to the fire service. And the fire service itself was an ad hoc organisation set up or managed by insurers, moving towards local councils' responsibility around the turn of the century. It was reactive, totally reactive. It was about self-help, very much like the lifeboat situation for communities. It was about people coming together, having some equipment and skills to try to intervene where a fire had broke out. Some science started to develop in 1918, a number of chief fire officers, and bear in mind there were around 500 fire brigades in place across England, Wales and Scotland around the turn of the century. Every town would have their own, but larger places had a professional chief fire officer, and a number of them came together and formed the institution of fire engineers. A number of those were already, if you look at their post-nominals, were already members of other professional bodies, but recognised that fire was different and needed its own institution to promote, encourage and improve the science and practice of fire extinction, but as importantly, fire prevention and fire engineering, and give impulse to ideas. Excellent words that still carry forward today. They started the first examinations that were used by fire brigades to assist to cause people to study, to be able to prepare themselves for promotion. Time moved on to the Second World War, where the government took over all fire services, created a national fire service that was a professional alternative to being deployed to fighting. And in smaller communities, the auxiliary fire service comprised of volunteers. That's translated into modern times where we've got full-time fire stations and retained or on-call fire stations. But the government took over the whole, excuse me, the whole responsibility for fire services. And again, the total focus was on speed and weight of response to fires. Time developed and people started to think about designing buildings to resist fire or to resist the spread of fire. And we had the first national building regulations in 1966, amended quite significantly in 1984 to take on the now well established and accepted functional requirements approach with approved documents supporting it. We don't know what we'll see next with a review of Part B that's being planned and being commenced, but the concept of setting functional requirements, well talked about by Dame Judith, recognising that if we were prescriptive, we would be left behind, but we had at least started to build a framework of building regulations from the 1960s. Things still went wrong, and the country started to think about doing things after we'd had major events. The Eastwood Mills fire in Keighley, 8 workers died, 6 women, a man and a boy in 1956, leading towards the Factories Act, requiring a fire certificate for certain premises and bringing the fire service in to part of the equation for checking that means of escape was being complied with. Licensing regulations changed dramatically and included, again, the fire service being a statutory body involved in approvals of drinks licenses. The Top Story Club, Bolton, Lancashire, 1961, multiple fire deaths, again, leading to change in legislation. Henderson's department store in Liverpool, one of a trail of large department store fires, but the first one changed the Officers' Shops and Railway Premises Act, again bringing in the fire service as the people that would deal with means of escape. And that caused the fire services themselves to change. They started to create a fire safety department or a fire prevention department and employ people and train their staff to deal with looking at plans rather than just responding to buildings. I'm pleased to say that through my career, we saw a dramatic improvement in the emphasis on prevention. Government invested in a home fire risk check initiative campaign, backed up by a huge television advertising campaign. The worst year in my career was 1984, when we lost 1,100 people from fire. We're down to less than 300 in recent years, a dramatically better picture. But at what price? Did we become complacent? All of those preventative actions, some of them can't be taken credit for by the fire service. The technology that allowed us to have smoke detectors in every home, the changes to the building regulations in 1992 to require smoke detectors in new and amended buildings, have all added to that improvement. But that improvement has led fire to become a very rare event, and certainly fire deaths. Most firefighters will go through their career without dealing with one, thankfully, today. But we got the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, the tragic 72 deaths, and the discovery that we had 500 other buildings covered in the same material, the polyethylene core, with the same calorific value as petrol. We've got, as Paul mentioned, the new Building Safety Act. We've got a new building safety regulator. We are going to step in and say, for these buildings, until you have done some things, you will not get approval to go forward. We're putting some teeth back into the system. There's a new emphasis on competence, where key duty holders will have to appoint and identify suitable, competent persons. And amongst all this, that word that Dame Judith used, culture, the cross expansion and move into fire, providing a voluntary occurrence reporting process and access to information, is seen as a major step forward, assisting everyone involved in the safety process to deal with the fire and structural safety problems in a more informed and effective way. Paul and Alistair have talked something about the build-up. They've explained how Cross operates, in that we try to publish information in an easily digestible manner without placing blame. We've just yesterday published newsletter 66, which I'm delighted to say includes highlights of 5 fire reports. We have just but a trickle of reports coming through, but the sector is starting to understand, and we've got quite a journey to go through. First of all, they've got to know about Cross, they've got to trust Cross to be able to give reports and then value it. We have 2 designated people, myself and Dr. Peter Wilkinson, who's currently president of the Institution of Fire Engineers. We have built an expert panel. We're now up to 17 members, which includes fire engineers, representatives from the fire and rescue services, building control, academics and product specialists. And we've now published over 40 reports. We know that our report about the risk of collapse of multi-storey CLT buildings during a fire has been used in difficult discussions between building control bodies and designers and potential clients, and is a result. Actually, we produced a further report, because the feedback we had to our initial report was that just re-emphasised that the sector didn't understand the difference between common building situations and the use of CLT for tall buildings. At the other end of the scale, we've had reports about minor details, what could be seen to be minor details, but details that add up to potential failures. The fact that 2 types of passive fire protection might not work together as expected, but reading the instructions and understanding the details could have led to a better outcome. Alistair mentioned the risk from car batteries. You will have probably seen the news that you can't take an electric scooter on the tube, and anyone travelling by air will now be asked questions not only about the liquids, but very much about any lithium-ion batteries that they're carrying. Technology is improving in terms of how these batteries are lasting and giving us phones that last for a day. But the kickback to that is that the immense amount of energy that can be really released in an inappropriate manner. Volumetric buildings have been focused on. I thought off-site construction was a great solution to help with putting buildings more quickly into existence, but with the detail required between the sections, recognising that there are potential for fire spread in unseen areas. They're just a snapshot of some of the reports relating to fire. We're finding that we're only getting fire reports for, in general, higher level issues at the moment. We're hoping that the sector starts to understand more about how Cross can operate and how structural engineers use Cross as a safety tool that's live and there and relevant for them every day. Grenfell Tower tragedy was a wake-up call for us. We've had impacts of the impact of decades of regulation, potentially complacency coming in. We've learned lessons at every stage, and the Grenfell Tower inquiry has revealed an immense amount of awful detail of some of the behaviours that have gone in through all of that process. And we're pleased that Cross has opened the doors, that you, the structural engineering community, have created a tool that the fire sector, not just fire engineers, but the fire sector can get involved with and help demonstrate that there is a positive approach to safety culture and that global opportunity to prevent future tragedies.